It's good to be here. We're going to spend a lot of time getting you actively involved in the process. It's not going to be passive. You're going to be doing things with your hands and your brains. But just to put it in context, Deidre, Orlando, and I have spent a lot of time working overseas. Last night I was thinking about it. I've worked with clients in 30 different countries in a long time that I've been around. And so I wanted to give you a couple examples of why this is important, this whole subject. We all have in our mind, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it. Come on in. Oh, it's you. We have an assumption map about how the world lives. Well, in 2001, I remarried, and my wife is from China, born, raised, and educated in China. And then past 17 years have been lost in translation, getting better and better and better. So I'll give you a couple examples. First time I met my mother-in-law, we were in Tianjin, a city that most Americans have never heard of, a little city of 16 million people, twice the size of New York City. And using how I was trained by my mother, every time she served me, I said, "Xie xie," which is thank you in Mandarin. And the more I said it, the more upset she got with me. And so I finally asked my wife, what am I doing wrong? She said, in Chinese families, you don't say thank you to family members. You say thank you to strangers. And by your saying "xie xie," you're telling her that you're not accepting her as your mother-in-law. All right. We all have a map of what's appropriate, of what's right, based on where we were raised and our value system. Second example. I'm leading a group of MBAs to China. We want to spend a weekend at a town where they can relax. My TA says, let's go to Wuxi. It's next to the Lake Tahoe of China. So I checked with my wife, since she's Chinese, and she said, oh, Wuxi, that's way too small, they'll be bored. It's just a small town. Having been married long enough to know that small town is a relative term, I said, well, how many people live in that small town? She said, and this is truly an oxymoron, only 4.6 million people. Now, in the American context, that would be the second largest city in America. In the Chinese context, it's a tier 2 or tier 3 city. We all have maps. And the purpose of this event that we have is that our experts here, because Deidre and Orlando are going to do most of the work, are going to help you realize how ingrained your maps are, your assumption maps are, so that you can then identify them so when you're working with people from other countries or cultures or you're working overseas, you don't accidentally step on your map. So who's going to go first? All right. Orlando.
You are going first, and I think you did. So we're now on to phase 2. And excuse me for sitting down, but by the way, good morning, everybody. You know, sometimes I think if there are like 60 people in the room and we talk for an hour, that's equivalent to like a week and a half of work. So what we do ought to be worth that many hours. It kind of puts the pressure on us to say something worthwhile while we're at it. John talked about how we want to make this interactive, and we truly do. And so we invite all of you to turn on your mobile devices, turn on your phones, open your laptops, whatever it is that you have with you. And we'd like you to go to Socrative.com. Those of you who are on mobile phones, when you go on to whatever your browser is, when you get to Socrative.com, you're going to see 3 little horizontal bars in the corner. If you click on that, you're then going to see a place that says Student Login. You don't have to register or anything like that, but you have to join our room. And our room number is written there, 32EA2CB6. And so get everybody going on that. If any point during the hour you get lost, if you go back to that again, wherever we're at, you can join us wherever we're at again. Or if you're shy about doing it now and later on in the hour you say, yeah, sure enough, I do have the guts to push a button, feel free to join anytime. And we'll be happy to have you be part of the back and forth that we have going on here.
Are we keeping records of what they do in their votes?
We are not.
Deidre says we are.
During the hour, yes, but after the hour, no.
Okay, so you'll be anonymous once you leave this room.
It's actually anonymous either way, but we'll be tabulating the results.
Okay.
So a lot of you have already entered, and as you've entered, there is an initial question that we have for everybody. And this is the initial question. Which is closer to your approach? And then you can see the 2 options there. John talked about the map and the mindset that we have. We're going to look at a few of those as we get rolling today and see how that might be different in other people and other situations. And with that in mind, this is the first question, and it looks like at this point we have 50 people that have put into the system and 35 that have already answered the question. So we're going to give you just another minute to figure out how to do that. And every so often I'm going to stand up just because I feel so low in that chair. Yeah. You know, and as we talk about things today, there is a level, of course, where we put people in different compartments. Our objective today is not to say everybody in Mexico is everybody in China is but we are saying that you are going to meet people that are different than you are and look at things in a different way. And how to deal with them, that's going to be the question that comes up. And internationally, even more so because the assumptions that we make that we don't really know what's going on. So as we do this, it's not to put you into a little compartment. It's just to get you thinking of what's it like to work with people that are in a different sort of category. We've now got all 56 people that have answered it, just to kind of get a sense of this first one here. In this room right now, we have about 54% that chose A and 46% that chose B. And so I'm going to ask Deirdre just kind of what her initial take is on that.
Well, this is an interesting response. If we were in New York, where do you think the majority would be? Yeah. So because we are in the southern part of the United States, a large percentage of us have somewhat indirect tendencies. That means we prioritize interpersonal relationships, and we're very careful how we respond to people. A more direct approach is one in which people pretty much say what they mean. And actually, business culture has a stronger direct approach in the US than we do as people talking to our friends. People who have a strong direct tendency separate their ideas and people's judgments of their ideas from people's judgments of them personally. So if I'm very direct and I say to you, what do you think about this idea? And you say, I don't think that's going to work. Here's why. I may be disappointed, but I'm not going to feel that you've attacked me personally. I'm probably going to give clear responses to people based on what I really think, and I'm going to expect them to do the same for me. The advantage of the direct approach is that it's very clear and it's efficient. We tell each other what we mean in very clear terms, and then we can move on and get to the best solution. Indirect people, on the other hand, prioritize interpersonal relations, and they want to make sure that no one leaves an interaction feeling humiliated or embarrassed. In some cultures, this is called face saving, and preserving and building people's face, their sense of self-esteem, and so on, is very important. And in those environments, telling someone, yeah, your idea is really not going to work, and here's why, could actually be construed as insulting and humiliating, and people will withdraw from that kind of interaction. So directness and indirectness can cause a lot of difficulties in business, and we'll talk more about that. The advantage, though, and I want to point out that each approach has an advantage. Each approach is accompanied by certain kinds of skills, and studies have shown that people in indirect cultures are better at reading other people because they don't take yes at face value. They are looking not just at what you said, but also your facial expression and your body language, because that's how a lot of that information gets conveyed. So there are advantages to each approach.
You know, building on what, oh, that's loud. Building on what Deirdre just said, there's a great text of saying, your actions are making so much noise, I can't hear what you're saying. And it's the same thing.
So we're talking about some people are very direct in the way they do things, and you're going to deal with somebody who's less direct in the way that they do things, and so how do you interact together? The next slide we show here is a photograph I took at the Imperial Palace in Beijing. In the very end, there is a garden, and the structure has a number of rocks, and on top of that is like a little house on top of that. And then this is the sign that is in front of the rock structure. I think I ought to ask our Chinese visitors here, would you like to read that in Chinese for me first? And the translation is, a single act of carelessness leads to the eternal loss of beauty. And my experience when I went there the first time, I looked at that sign and my American brain went, what could this possibly mean? And then little by little, it dawned on me in my direct American style, the sign means, what would you say?
Small mistake leads to a big problem.
Or I went even farther. Our American sign would say, do not climb on the rocks. And that's what this sign means. It is saying, in essence, if you, careless person, accidentally destroy this thing, people in future generations would not be able to enjoy the wonderful thing you're looking at right now. So please be careful. But that means do not climb on the rocks. So if that's the mindset that you have, let's look at another sign here. This one I took at the Alumni Center here at UT. Okay, here's this picture. So knowing we have this picture now, let's go back to our Socrative for a second. And I'd like to then say, now that you've done this and you've seen those two different signs, what do you notice about this US sign that's a little bit different now? Is there anything that looking at this sign you would have thought nothing before, but now you have a new thought or a new idea or what it might mean in terms of directness, American style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
What are the choices?
You could write
It's
it
a fill in the blank.
That's
Aha.
dangerous.
And so let's give some people a chance to write that for a second here.
Isn't it so cool? You don't have to sit and listen to talking heads. You can actually participate. I love this.
And notice not only there's no photograph, block letters, bold colors. There it is. No alcohol beyond this point. Look at that. We've already got 29 people who have
Yep.
answered this one. I'm just going to let you kind of view some of those there. Look at that, very blunt. It's more direct and harsh.
Starts with no.
Starts with no, very
Doesn't
curt.
give the reason behind it.
You know, not giving the reason behind it, that is awesome, because that's exactly the way that indirect people communicate. They give you the reason behind the
I love
behind the
the chug
behavior.
what you have. Now that's a Texan, let me tell you.
It could come off
Suck
as,
it up, baby.
it could come off as offensive or bold to some and simply crystal clear to others. That's a great point.
You know, that's a really nice one, because we sometimes sound very harsh and direct and bold and blunt when we just think we're being clear and precise. And we don't always appreciate what that sounds like to the non-direct person when we say, no alcohol beyond this point. And they're going, why are you so angry? I'm not. So great observation there. Really nice.
I did an experiment a couple of days ago with my wife. I sent her an email. That's not the experiment. It was in all caps. And her immediate response was, why are you shouting at me? That's an email, so there's no voice. But if you ever look at an email that you get and it's all capitalized, it feels like the person writing it is shouting. It may not be your intention, but that's how it's received. And so one of the things I have learned over the years, it's not what you say that counts, it's what people hear that counts. And if you don't have a map of what they're thinking, an assumption set of what they're thinking, you can be saying something that's very offensive and not understand why somebody's upset with you. And I can tell, this young man right behind the camera has had that experience, right?
And,
Oh, yeah.
And notice that, again, we're not saying that it's more correct to be less direct. In fact, I love this one comment here that says, this sign seems more succinct. You know, sure enough,
It is more
there's a way that you can get right to what you're really talking about as opposed to having the guesswork. And so drawing the positives from both sides is what the game is all about. Great, great comments. Font size is large even. Screaming no alcohol. So with that in mind, let's go back here and have Deidre kind of wrap this first section up for us in terms of what this all means. And we'll have some more questions in a second.
So one of the points, in fact, that you've made is that there's not necessarily a right way to do it. It really depends on your orientation. And many of the people in this room are actually indirect. However, we're unlikely to be as indirect as that sign. So that tells us that everything is relative. And people in every culture have every cultural tendency. However, some value certain approaches more than others. And there's a judgment of cultural tendencies that are different from our own. So the judgment of people who are highly direct is that indirectness is kind of dishonest. You're not really saying what you mean. Why don't you come out and say it? And even that it's a little devious. And sometimes I hear when I talk about this, people say it's passive aggressive. If they want us to do something, tell us what to do, right? The judgment of indirect people when it comes to people who are highly direct is that they're unsophisticated and rather boorish and can be, they're extremely aggressive and that they hurt people's feelings. So what are the implications of this difference in tendency in business? Well, the first one is that indirectness increases with power distance. What that means is that if you're at the top, you are not going to hear the truth very often. You're going to get limited feedback. People are going to be afraid to tell you things you don't want to hear. And certainly they're going to hesitate to tell you that your ideas are not very good. So it's very difficult to get honest feedback when you're dealing with indirect people, particularly if you're in a position of power. So what do you do about that? Well, you need to set expectations, and you really need to be sure that you're rewarding straight talk when you get it. So if someone brings you bad news very hesitantly, instead of saying, oh, well, that's going to ruin our marketing strategy, you want to take a deep breath and say, that's not good news, but it's so helpful that we have it now because we're going to be able to respond to it effectively. And I really appreciate your bringing me that information because now we can do something about it. So you want to really focus on that aspect. Another problem is that indirectness takes a lot of extra time that in a direct society we're not particularly used to. Indirectness, if Orlando's upset with me and he's highly indirect, is he going to tell me? Heck no, he's going to tell John, and we're going to pretend that John is highly indirect. I know that's a stretch for those of you who know him. But then John's going to invite me to lunch, and John, at the very end of our conversation, is going to say, by the way, talked to Orlando the other day. And he's going to give me the bad news, and I'm going to say to John, oh, well, that's not what I meant. Oh, no, I blah, blah. And John then will set an appointment with Orlando and tell him, okay? So all this takes a great deal of time. So it's very important not to assume everything's going well. You need to really look beneath the surface. When someone says, oh, yes, that's a good idea, thank you. You want to say, well, thanks. Can you think of any problems that might be associated with that? What about implementation? Give them an opportunity and an invitation to help you problem solve. If you're extremely direct, you can cause unintended offense by criticizing other people's ideas. A highly direct approach is, oh, no, that's not going to work, and here's why, A, B, C. In an indirect environment, you have just humiliated the person that you're talking to, and if you're in public, you've humiliated them in public. You won't be hearing from them from that point on. So to avoid unintended offense, what I recommend is begin with praise. Oh, thank you for this report. I can tell you've spent a lot of time working on it. This is really detailed analysis, and I appreciate the fact that you went into this level of detail. I'm wondering about implementing your recommendations, and then you begin to talk about, I'm not sure about this, and indirectly, gently move on towards the criticisms that you have.
So that was item number 1, learning to observe, am I more direct or less direct in the people I'm dealing with, and then how to adjust to that. Let's go on to a second topic. And so let's go back to our Socrative again on this opinion of second topic, second question. Let me actually move us on to that. Which of the following is closer to your opinion, A or B?
Full screen. Full screen. Full screen.
This one doesn't, it's not a flower.
It's a Mac.
Go ahead and keep on voting, but I'm going to show our percents up to this point.
Whoa.
Whoa, ho. Deirdre gets to explain why 98% of the group is saying the same thing here.
This isn't too surprising because Americans as a whole, and I want to emphasize that generalizations are not a good idea. You are not going to be doing business with China. You're going to be doing business with a set of individuals, a group, a company. And those individuals have their own cultural orientation, and the companies that you deal with will have their own cultural orientations, and they may be different from each other. However, as you can see, there are some relatively strong tendencies in certain countries, and Americans happen to be one of the very most independent oriented countries in the world. And people who have an independent orientation value personal initiative. We take ownership of what we do. And we expect that the product of our work is going to be something that our name is on and that other people are going to appreciate what we did and that we will be rewarded on the basis of our personal effort. The advantage of independent orientation is that when people come together to collaborate, you get lots of points of view. Individuals speak up, whether we don't go along to get along, we say what we think, and we avoid groupthink that way. Group orientation has different priorities. The priority is the harmonious relationship of the group, of people who are in the group. And people will make sacrifices of their own opinions or their own preferences for the group. People may work together in a room smaller than this, side by side, with even hundreds of people in a room together so that they can constantly collaborate on their work. Teams produce work that is so closely integrated that it may be almost impossible to determine who did what. And so our MBA students, our international MBA students, my colleagues in our career services program tell me that sometimes they're Asian MBA students, when they're being interviewed by a US employer and they're asked to describe their work, they use the word we. And employers expect to hear I. I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and they don't feel that they can really comfortably say what they themselves did because it was such a group effort. The advantage of this approach is that teams are so closely integrated. They function like a well-oiled machine, like a single organic unit. Everybody knows everybody else, and they know their strengths and their weaknesses and what to come to them for and what their reactions are going to be. And those groups can become very powerful and very effective.
So with that idea of group mentality, individual mentality, let's
Before
look
we
at
go
another
there, let me just
photograph.
throw
Here.
one
Go
thing
ahead.
out.
Sure.
I've done work with a lot of tech companies that have global operations, and one of the big issues they run into is if they're a US-based company, the expectation, like 98% of you, is it's going to be individualistic, we're going to recognize success, you're going to speak up, even if you're saying dog it, you don't know what you're talking about. And then they have complained to me that their colleagues in India or in China or other places overseas aren't comfortable with that. The key, and that's why we have this seminar today, is to understand why they're not comfortable. The mistake is to assume that they're passive, they don't really know what they're doing, versus understanding that this is a culture where it doesn't make sense. Second thing to understand is if they're working for another company, what is the culture of that company? And there are a lot of companies overseas where it's a patriarchal company. The CEO is the decision maker. All decision is made by her or made by him. And if you question the CEO, you get fired on the spot. You need to understand if that's the environment you're dealing with, because that then again helps you understand the cultural view of your colleagues. It is death to them to question a senior person's opinion, period. And if you're dealing with people like that, then you have to understand that and create an environment where they're comfortable in sharing their opinions. And what Deidre said is a great way of how to do that.
Perfect. And with that in mind, this is any Brazilians in here today? This is a photograph of Natura, a company that makes cosmetics. This is a picture of the factory floor. It's a picture of the factory floor at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What do you notice about this factory? There's nobody there. It is totally stopped. This company has a mindset of, to improve the quality of life of everybody, we stop production so that you have at least a 2-hour block in the middle of the day to take care of stuff. On site here, they have doctor's offices, dentist offices, banks, stores, nurseries, just tons of things for the employees to take advantage of the things they need to do. And they've said, this is so important to our company, we are literally closing down production during this whole block of time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so that we can then give people a chance to do what they need to do outside of their work responsibilities. Isn't that an amazing picture? 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we've talked about this idea. Now let's look at another photograph here in the United States, again with this mindset of what does this say to you that you may not have thought of before. And so this is a photograph that I took, a picture of this at the Houston airport on the way to a gate, and it says, priority boarding lets me put on my carry-on nearby, and gives you all the reasons why you ought to get this card. So let's go back again to our Socrative, and let's give you a chance to write your answer as to what insight do you now get thinking about the concept of group versus individual.
And if you're new, you can go to Socratic.com, do the student ID, and use this room, and you can participate in this process. And it's totally anonymous.
And so it is. Yeah, keep on adding your comments, but we're going to kind of start at the bottom here. Me, not us. All about me, myself, and I. Where's the regard for other travelers?
Oh, come on. It's my bag. Come on.
Me-oriented and benefited to me-oriented.
One is more important than others.
Absolutely. That's why they have first class.
And you know, if you don't get on, there's no room to put your bag. And so if you can get on first, you can put your bag where you want to put your bag. And that sorry sucker that has to come on the plane later on, let him worry about where his bag goes. But your bag is on next to you.
You know how frustrating it is to get on late, sit and Be able to put your seat,
yeah,
and
man.
there's no space above your seat because some other person has put their bag there. I mean, come on, Orlando.
She's the only one on that plane. For a fee, you can be more important than the others.
For a fee. And what I love about your comments is exactly what we hope that would happen, which is you may have never looked at that sign and thought of what does this imply about the values of individuality in the United States, where it's a very positive promotion. Get this card and you can do all these great things. But that's all thinking in terms of what's best for me. And put that, imagine if somebody was going to try that same strategy in another place in the world where the me first concept isn't number one in our mind. What's going to happen in that situation?
You just have to understand. I love that one quote. I got to have this card.
I got it.
Let's do this.
So wonderful. And again, we're not saying it's a bad thing to do this, but when you understand the concept of individuality versus community sort of thinking, it causes us to think differently when we see this and makes us more open to how is this going to affect other people along the way. So we'll turn it over to Deirdre then to wrap this one up as well.
Okay. Yeah, so the idea of having a factory completely abandoned at 2 o'clock, that's the kind of thing that you see in highly group-oriented countries. Brazil is an example. Japan is another one. Everyone takes lunch at the same time because it's assumed that people are going to want to eat with their colleagues, and the company prioritizes that because it's considered valuable and important for people to have those strong connections. In the US, what do? We stagger, right? So that there's always customer service. There's always someone working, right? We never shut down production, certainly not for that reason, right? So if you have an independent mindset, which we naturally do, coming from this kind of environment, some things that we may not expect in a more group-oriented situation. One is a long time for decision making. The way that decision making is done in highly group or collectivist-oriented environments is that everyone has to come together face-to-face, naturally, because this is a group orientation. And so everybody has to travel to make the decision, and then they go around the room, and everyone states their opinion. And if anyone disagrees with the solution, they go around again, and they modify it until the decision is unanimous. One person does not make the decision, there's no majority rule. So if you come to a meeting assuming, as Americans do, that this is an opportunity to debate various ideas, and you throw something out, you'll send your group-oriented colleagues back to the drawing board. They'll sit around, go around the circle until a decision is made, and they'll come back. And then that may take 2 weeks, and they'll give you a response. And if at that point you say, well, but you know, I was thinking maybe we could do this instead, what happens? They go back and start over. So in highly group-oriented environments, in many cases, meetings are not a place to brainstorm and throw out ideas. They're the place where well-thought-out ideas are cemented. And so you want to avoid brainstorming in meetings. You want to think about the proposal that you're bringing very carefully and make sure it's as fully formed as possible. Another problem working with group-oriented partners that independents really don't see coming is that group-oriented cultures are so focused on the group itself. They're very integrated with each other, but they have very strong boundaries on the outside, and they don't integrate well with other groups. And so we tend to think in the US, well, we're going to have a partnership with this other company. We're going to be members of a big group together. We're just going to merge. Our boundaries are going to become fuzzy, and we're going to merge together and be members of a bigger group. And that's not what group-oriented cultures tend to think. People tend to say, well, we're going to maintain our facade of competence and unity, and we're not going to let those outsiders see what's going on inside. And so you can find that there's a one-way information flow. Information is going from you to them, but you're getting very little back. So it's really important to sit down beforehand and talk about information flow, what it looks like, and what you should expect, and what each party will contribute. And then finally, when someone asks independents their opinion, they tend to respond as individuals. Oh, well, I think it'll be ready on Tuesday, probably, right? That's very dangerous because in a group-oriented society, people always speak for the group. So if you ask someone a question and they're not sure what the official line or story or response is, they will say, I don't know, I'll ask. They go away, they get official information, and they bring it back. If they ask three, this is my Japanese client speaking, if I ask 3 Americans the same question, I get 3 different answers. What's right? Why can't they agree on anything? Why are they so disorganized? And it's because we're answering as individuals. So what I recommend when you're dealing with a group-oriented culture, if someone asks you a question, you want to say, speaking for the group or speaking for my company, and if you can't do that comfortably, say, I'll get the answer for you, and go away and come back. Okay.
So item number 1 is, where do we fit on this scale of being direct or not direct? Item number 2, where do we fit on this being comfortable with the individual versus the group sort of way of doing things? Let's now move on to topic number 3. And let's give you a chance again to answer another question.
Fill the screen. Orlando.
They see it on their,
Oh, they can see it.
yeah, they see it on their screen.
Okay. Thank you. You guys are fast. Look at that.
Got 14 who've already answered it. Which of the following is closer to your working style? Arriving at a meeting. Feel free to keep on answering if you haven't already, but up to this point, this is the breakdown. So Deirdre, tell us what it means when 83% are choosing A.
What it means is that although many of us actually have flow tendencies, American business environment really prioritizes schedule orientation. Scheduling is very important to us, and even though those of you who responded B probably have faced some discrimination, right? Because not only do we prioritize it, but we have judgments about people who don't do things on time and according to schedules. Schedule orientation, that's the person who arrives punctually, they're on time when they get there.
Well, think of the meaning of that word punctual.
Pardon?
Punctual. That is a value-laden word, right?
It's a very value-laden word. Yeah, you have to be careful how you describe things even. And they are also, schedule-oriented people also tend to schedule and plan. They see time as linear. In my day, I'm going to do this and this and this and this, and you have an order for it. Flow-oriented people are the ones who arrive 10 or 20 or, depending where you are, maybe an hour late, and who have a cup of coffee in one hand and they're talking on their cell phone as they walk into the meeting. And those are the people who don't worry too much about what's coming up until it gets there. And so they don't tend to plan. So I always ask my students, so when do you do most of your work? And my flow-oriented students say the night before. Americans have, well, I should say schedule people in general have a significant bias against flow orientation. People who have flow orientation are lazy. They're not committed is another one. They really don't care very much, and so on. People and being schedule-oriented has certain advantages, and the principal advantage is reliability. People who are schedule-oriented are reliable. What we don't take into consideration is that each orientation has its own skills. People from flow-oriented environments, often this would be Latin America, Southern Europe, the Middle East, all of Africa. People who come particularly from emerging economies are operating in an environment where things aren't guaranteed. So when I leave the house in the morning, am I going to get to work on time? Well, that depends on whether there's gas in the gas station, on whether the road is washed out, and so on. And so I'm not going to stress too much about the exact time I arrive. And if I can't get there while I'm sitting at the gas station waiting for the pump to arrive, or waiting at the bridge for it to come down, I'm going to do a few other things. I'm going to mix and match and move things around. Flow-oriented people are expert troubleshooters, problem solvers, and they're very good change managers. So it's important to realize that with each of these tendencies, even though it may inconvenience us at some level, it also brings with it skills that we may not have, because schedule-oriented people are much less flexible in that way.
Let me give you a couple of examples. My wife and I host international students for Thanksgiving. And a few years ago, some of our German students showed up 20 minutes early. If you think about having people over your house, nobody shows up 20 minutes early. And they said, why are you here? Well, you must understand, Herren, that if you're in Germany, if you show up 10 minutes early, you're late. I'd never heard that before. Fast forward, I'm in India with a bunch of my MBA students. We're being hosted by a member of parliament at his house. It's a wonderful dinner, and he has servants with costumes and everything. It's just great. He shows up to the party that he is hosting 4 hours late. And so I talked to my Indian friends, and they said, the more important you are, the later you can be. And so being late is not an indication that you just can't tell time. It's just an indication of how much power you have. And so how do you deal with it? We're in Beijing. We're talking to the head of an American oil company. They negotiate deals between $250 million and $1 billion with their Chinese counterparts. And so I asked the country CEO, I said, what role does golf play in your business? And he looked at me and just smiled. He said, John, I'll give you an example. If I call the head of, and I won't use Sinop because it's represented here, but if I call the head of Sinopec, which is a big Chinese oil company, my assistant will call the chairman's assistant and say, so-and-so wants to speak with you about a deal, and the chairman and their assistant will say, well, we can find a space for you in 2 weeks. We can give you 20 minutes. And I know when I go to the chairman's office, it's going to be doing exactly what Deidre talking about. People are going to be coming in and out. The phone's going to be ringing. I might get 10 minutes. But if I have my assistant call his assistant and say, would the chairman like to play golf? The answer always is, when is the tee time? And then I will be in a golf cart with that person for 4 to 4.5 hours with no distraction. And oh, by the way, when he screws up the golf ball, our relationship changes very quickly. And so what this guy did is that I know how to manage the process. Golf is something that gives me access that I could never get if I just called up for an appointment. And so you have to use what we're talking about to do a better job of managing in an environment where there's a different value of time.
And that's why you want to work on your slice. Next photo. This was taken in France. And if you can read the sign, for the non-French speakers here, the translation would be, those people that are in a hurry are not even welcome at this establishment. Thank you.
Merci.
Wow, isn't that something? It says, don't even come to this restaurant if you're in a hurry, because we want you to take your time while you're here. So that concept of time, knowing that, let's now look at another photograph.
That is so French.
And get your concept of what this sign might mean that you never thought of before in the United States. And so this is a sign. I took this one at the Salt Lick. And as you walk into the Salt Lick, the sign says, to satisfy all barbecue lovers, we appreciate your dining time be limited to 1.5 hours. So with that in mind, let's give you a chance to write down your observations of now what do you think of when you see such a sign?
It's not even good English.
Limit your dining time.
It's not good English.
Limit your dining.
It's Texan. Well, it's not Louis Texan. Texan would be, you're here for an hour and a half, we'll kick you out.
I have literally walked into Salt Lick with a group of Brazilians. This is the signs, the first thing they see when they walk into that.
I had Brazilian students who were actually asked to leave restaurants, and I said, well, how long, we're talking about restaurant culture, and I said, well, let's talk about American restaurants. They have looking at restaurant culture actually is a really good way to identify multiple cultural tendencies. And I said, what happens when you stay a long time at a restaurant? And I was expecting them to say, you know, they come by and they interrupt you to refill your iced tea as though you were about to die of thirst. You know, you've been there for an hour drinking iced tea, but if you don't have this much more, you'll die, right? You know, to remind you that you're actually done with your meal. And so I said, so what happens when you've been there a while? And my Brazilian students said, they tell you to leave. And I said, really? How long had you been there? And they said, only 3 hours.
Only 3 hours, yeah.
Only 3
Let's see what you say about this. Time is money.
hours. Money. Mm-hmm.
It seems unwelcoming. It's amazingly assertive, isn't it? Eat this food and get your butt out of here, you know? You've eaten already. I want to eat at the Paris restaurant. But, you know, hey, an hour and a half ought to be enough.
I need at least 3 hours. Franklin's.
Please get out after you've given us your money.
The emphasis on money as opposed to enjoyment and relationships. I mean, I have literally been in Brazilian restaurants where it takes almost 2 hours to even finally order the food. Because you just kind of chat, and the waiter comes by and goes, "You ready to order yet?" "Oh, I haven't even opened up the menu, sorry."
And you think that makes sense, Orlando?
And what's kind of fun about this is we are almost at 12:28. And by now, they're going, how much time do we have to finish up this talk? And how much time do we have?
We have until 1.
We have till 1.
Q&A.
So you see how she's already giving us the signs of how our time is doing. Because there's an efficiency concept that goes with it. But on the other end, if you are the sort of person that looks at it differently, let's have Deirdre now wrap that up for us.
We welcome you, but not for too long. So notice that there are some judgments here. Actually, one person said, "Come on, how long do you need to eat?" And then there were a couple of others that say, "Hey, this is a totally reasonable thing to do." It's all a question of perception, and it depends on where you are. So in Brazil, that kind of sign would be considered extremely offensive, and nobody would want to eat in that restaurant. So it depends really on your perception of things, and it's important. A lot of U.S. executives complain to me that when they go to France, they can't get the waiter's attention. Well, in France, waiters think it's rude to interrupt your meal. And that they should have to be summoned because they don't want you, they assume you're there to visit with your friends and to enjoy the meal and not to have constant discussions with the waiter. So the difference in this in these perceptions has to do with the involvement dimension of culture, and we in the U.S. have a tendency to be more much more schedule-oriented. And some of the problems that we come up with, first of all, if you're dealing with a flow-oriented partner, there's a lot more uncertainty. You're not sure that things are going to happen on time. A good way to manage that is, because flow-oriented people tend to do things at the last minute, create a last minute for them, but move it up. So pad your deadline so that they have to, so that they are delivering to you at a time that's earlier than when you need it, and then if it's 2 days late, you've padded by 3 days and you're still okay. Missed deadlines are definitely a possibility, and another possibility is that although they make the deadline, the work was done at the last minute and it's not very careful. So in addition to padding your deadlines, you want to provide incentives and penalties so that they are really focused on internal as well as end-line deadlines. Internal milestones can help people, can help create a sense of urgency that will bring people up to keep the workflow moving. And then finally, you don't want to be the bad guy. You don't want to be the person who's so rigid, which is the flow judgment of schedule culture. So rather than be the person who's constantly saying, are you going to have this on time? You know, it's due tomorrow, and this kind of thing. Let the contract be the enforcer for you. Build in incentives and penalties so that you don't have to be the one who is constantly harassing people. And leverage their creativity. Recognize that when it comes to a problem, a crisis, a change in the environment, these are the people that you want on your side, and you don't want to have such a negative relationship with them that you can't invoke that creativity.
So let me share an insight. I used to teach in a Japanese business school every summer in Tokyo, and some of my Japanese colleagues said, if you understand people's different attitudes about time, that can be a great tool for negotiations. I told you about golf in China. They said some of our Japanese colleagues, when they are negotiating with Americans, the first thing they do when the American shows up is to ask, when are you scheduled to return home? What flight are you going to take? And the American assumption is, well, they want to make sure that they can provide us with a driver to go to the airport. And my friends, Japanese friends, reality is we know Americans, when it gets close to we have to leave, they get focused on we have to leave on time. And so they'll delay.
We have to have a deal.
They'll delay negotiating the deal as long as possible. Let's go out to dinner, let's go get drinks, and then it's, you know, an hour before you have to go to the airport. Well, let's talk about the details. I gotta leave. All right, but we have to have a deal. You've been here for a week. All right, well, what do you need to do so I can get on the plane? And they said, if you are an American and you're negotiating with folks who use that tool, you have an open return. And you tell them, I'll return when the deal is done. I don't know when it's going to be, however long it takes. And typically, you're going to get the deal done a lot faster. So the key with what we're talking about is, if you understand that there are different ways of looking at things, then you can figure out how you're going to manage yourself and how you're going to run business. But if you're clueless to it, it's not going to be pretty.
So topic number one was, how much are we direct or indirect in the way we deal with others? Topic number two, are we kind of individually minded or community minded? Topic number three was, how do we divide our time, scheduled or with the flow? And let's look at a fourth topic, and our final topic for today is going to be this question about our approach again on personal connections. And let me send that to the next page again. So go back to your Socrative, and
now,
now,
pictures, Orlando?
which is the,
No signs, no pictures?
There are pictures.
there will be
They're coming.
in a second.
Be
All right.
patient.
Patience.
You're so schedule oriented.
I am so schedule oriented.
And we will get you out of here by 1 o'clock.
Right. And you're from the government, and you're here to help.
We've already had. So the A people are answering that they get things done through personal connections, and the B people are saying they get things done by following appropriate procedures.
You know, most of you responded already. It's important to understand that there are no stereotypes that hold, that these are some tendencies that we've seen, but in any country with any culture, there are people who have a different way of doing things. And so the most important thing to do is to check, try to assess what the people you're dealing with think and how they feel. Because
Which is what we see in this actual room with a 52% and a
Wow.
48%. Look at that.
Right. So there are, not only are there people who have certain preferences, not only are there companies that have certain orientations, but there are industries as well that value one thing over another. So for example, real estate in the US is very highly network oriented. Obviously, who you know and your relationships with people are very, very important. In defense contracting, presumably somewhat less. So it depends on the industry and it depends on the environment. At the same time, American business tends to prioritize systems and processes. Americans take a dim view of playing favorites in the workplace, for example. So how many of you, if your brother-in-law's cousin came in with and requesting a job, how many of you would feel comfortable hiring that person even though someone else had a little better resume? Okay.
No.
So that kind of sets the, that sort of explains the strong process orientation in business. Now, we may use personal connections, but we only take it so far in the US because we are really very strongly process-oriented. Processes means that we have a lot of systems, we have a lot of forms, we have a lot of criteria that we use to make decisions so that things are fair and equitable. Network orientation comes from countries where getting things done as an individual using a system may not be very effective. And so I need to be able to rely on people in my environment, people I know, and the people they know to get things done. And in those kinds of environments, people's relationships are used as a kind of social currency. I'm going to do you a favor, and I know that at some point I'm going to have to do a favor for you. So I've heard a number of stories, one recently by Americans who were expatriates in Brazil, and they had a lovely time with their Brazilian hosts, and they were so impressed by the hospitality of this particular family, and they took them in, and they felt like they became part of the family, and it was so wonderful and lovely, and they came home, and a year later they got a phone call saying, our son is coming to Austin to go to school there, and he is so looking forward to staying with you. Okay? Because it's just natural that the hospitality that they extended on the one end was going to be reciprocated on the other. They never even questioned that that would be available to their son. So the difference between network and process orientation is very good in terms of fairness. Everyone knows kind of what to expect. It's very fact-oriented, logic-based. Network orientation brings a completely different perspective. It has downsides, but the upside is that when you have a network-oriented friend or employee, you have access to all of the resources of all of the people that they know.
So let me give you a couple of examples. We like to, in America, say we're process-oriented. When I talk to people, especially at high-tech companies, and there's a job opening, if you have two equally qualified candidates and one is referred to the hiring manager by somebody inside, that's the person who's going to get hired, period. Now flip it over. A few years ago, a long time ago actually, my wife said, I want my parents to come visit us. I said, fine, no problem. Typical American response. I'm going to apply for a visa. I said, fine, no problem. And my assumption set is that once you got the visa, we talk about when and for how long. And so she said, I got the visa, I'm going to get them a ticket. I said, fine, no problem. I assume she's going to talk to me about when. And then one day she says, I have the ticket, they're coming. And, okay, when? They'll be here in 6 weeks. For how long? We're talking about in-laws. And then she said words I'd never thought about with in-laws. They will only be here for 2 months. Now, in the American context, only and 2 months for in-laws does not compute. But thinking that there might be a lost in translation issue, I went to talk to my Chinese students, and to a person, they said, 2 months? That's so short. Why are they coming? I said, what's the norm? 6 months, and then you renew the visa for another 6 months. And exactly, right? I know what I'm talking about? And the idea of in-laws staying with you for a year, for some of us, is wonderful. For most Americans, it's not so wonderful. I'll just leave it at that. But it's a completely different way of looking at things. And your challenge is to understand that, because we have this map. And my map was in-laws, a weekend maybe. Only 2 months is beyond imagination.
So thinking of network versus relationship, here's another photograph, a picture that we took in Chile at a supermarket. And as you check out at the supermarket, there is a special line. This special line is for futura mamá and minusválidos. Those that are pregnant and those that are handicapped, they have special line for them in the supermarket. Tells you something about a value that they would give of who has to get out of that store a little quicker. Okay? With that in mind, let's do our last question of the day. I took this picture at H-E-B with a nice little Texas flag in the background and an express lane that says it's for those that have 15 items or fewer. And so once again, let's give you a chance to say, now that you've been thinking of this, what does this tell you about American culture or values that you may not have thought of before when you look at a sign that says express line? Give you a second to answer that one.
As long as a pregnant woman has 15 items or less, she can be in that line also.
While you're filling that out, I know a friend in Brazil who goes to the store with his mother so he can get in that line because she's elderly. Takes his mom to the store to get through the line quicker.
And we know people in Texas who have disabled stickers. There's nothing disabled about them.
Or you know this one too. You have 20 items, so you give 10 to your friend and 10 to you, and you both divide it so that together you can go through the 15 items or less line.
Or worse, you have 20 items, you get in the line anyway.
And get in anyway.
All right.
They're
Huh?
small.
They're small items.
They're small, right?
I got 4 avocados, that's one item.
Or I got 4 different fruits, it's one fruit.
Yeah, you would think that way, Orlando.
All right, let's see what everybody is saying here and keep on answering it as we go through this. The priorities are different. Good luck if you got kids.
Not based on the person, but the circumstances. Time is money. Value speed versus personal need. Time versus people.
You know, the value of time. Your time is important. Let's get you out of here if you don't have as many items.
Efficiency, speed.
But the reality is, how many of us have had one thing and we ask somebody if we can get in front of them and they've said no, and we have said, okay, no problem. We get irritated, right?
How many times do you offer somebody?
I do that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And the last time I did it, the woman looked at me like, okay, what's the deal?
What do you want?
What do you want? Why are you doing this? I said, nothing, it's okay. I'll walk away, please.
Process and time-oriented numbers rather than descriptive.
I love the one, I see no comparison. They're not the same. They're apples and oranges. You have a pregnant woman and somebody who's handicapped versus we want people who just have a few things, have the ability to get through the store faster. And
College
that's
students
a
don't
little
care about the sign, they do whatever they want.
So Deirdre, why don't you wrap this up for us in terms of what this means within a business context?
So a lot of us said that we were fairly network-oriented, but there are parts of the world where people are so seriously network-oriented that every decision is really made based on the effect that it's going to have on the network. And so you think you've got a better price, better quality, better delivery time, whatever, and it doesn't matter because I'm sourcing from my cousin. He's part of my network. And I can trust him. And by the way, if he does something wrong, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to his house, right? I don't have to call the authorities or whatever. I know where he lives. I'm going to call my aunt. The next time we have a family picnic, he's going to be disgraced, right? I can bring pressure to bear on him. Mm-hmm. So the fact that your product is a little better and a little cheaper, do I care about that? Absolutely not. So we have a tendency to think that business is done on the basis of spreadsheets. But international business is very much done on the basis of personal connections, perceptions of people, and so on. So if you were opening a sales office or a factory in a highly network-oriented environment, you might find that people spend a great deal of time socializing. Why? Is it because they just don't care about work? Actually, socializing is part of the value proposition that they bring to their work. So they spend a lot of time connecting with each other so that they develop and maintain strong relationships. That means they're going to spend more time when they make a sales call. They're going to spend more time on the phone. When they go to a meeting, they're going to spend more time talking to each other. They're going to take longer breaks, take longer for lunch, and so on. So how do you deal with that? If you really have a focused workplace with productivity as a priority, you can bring measures that are going to enhance productivity, but you want to balance that by creating social outlets at the same time. So maybe you want to tell everybody, okay, we've got a new productivity goal, and people are really going to have to focus during work, and they're going to have less time for those relationships, but at the end of the month, every month, we're going to have a party. And we're going to invite family and friends, or we're going to invite everyone's children. Or we're going to, every Friday afternoon, we're going to have a happy hour social. Some way to re-inject and to acknowledge and benefit from those strong social connections that people have. If you dampen down, if you squelch that relationship orientation, you won't get the value of it. If people can never hire anybody that they know, then their social network begins to devalue them, and they don't bring the value to your business. So another challenge is that decisions are based on connections. And so you have to be very careful that you don't end up with a whole company full of everybody's best friends and relatives. To do that, you can bring a set of procedures and criteria to the table. Here's the basis on which we hire people. And this way you give people tools and sort of justification, ammunition for saying to their members of their network, oh, I'd love to hire you, but you need to understand that here are the criteria for this job, and I'm not allowed to hire people who don't meet those criteria. At the same time, again, if you impose those kinds of rules so strictly that people are no longer able to participate in their network, you damage them. So you need a balance. And then finally, as the person who is so process-oriented, you may seem cold. We get to a meeting. Hi, how are you? Okay, item number 1. That is a very process-oriented approach. If you don't spend some time, oh, I know your sister was in the hospital. How's she feeling? If you don't take time to manage and nurture those relationships, you're going to seem cold and unfriendly, and you won't have any friends. So it's very important to find a point of connection with people. Make sure that you are able to talk to them about their lives and what they care about so that you can participate in those networks. And when you have a problem, you can say, gosh, we've got a big problem. Anybody know how to solve this? Oh, my cousin has a forklift. Oh, my in-laws have a relationship with the Ministry of Construction. And you'll suddenly find that resources come out of the woodwork.
There's something about assumptions that we talked about at the beginning that most Americans don't realize that we have when we talk about business deals. But my Latin American students told me decades ago or years ago, said, you Americans.
It was decades.
Thank you. You Americans take for granted that if you have a contract, it will be enforced. That the words on the contract will be enforced. We come from countries where the only thing that counts is who is on the other side. And the words have no meaning. And so part of our assumption set is that if we have a dispute and it's very clear in the contract that you owe me money and I sue, it might take some time, but I'm going to win. And I have friends, I won't mention the countries, the lawsuit about who owns a particular piece of property has been going on for 30 years, and they expect that it'll probably go on for another 30 years before it's resolved. In the United States, it doesn't happen. And so we have that assumption. Why is that important? If you're in an environment where the legal system is not transparent and fair, quote unquote, where what's on the contract is going to determine things, then these relationships become absolutely, totally crucial. Second observation is I've worked with clients all around the world, and they've said invariably, we know how much we want to pay. We know what the market price is, and there's a range, and if it's above or below the range, we're not going to pay. We also know what good service is. So our decision is not how much we're going to pay. Our decision is who we're going to work with. Because if there's a dispute and there's a problem, if it's a nice person, the person I like and person I'm comfortable with, we're going to work it out. But if it's, you know, we're going to do things quickly, let's get it done, you know, I've got to get on an airplane, then I'm worried that if there's an issue, I might not be able to get things resolved fairly, and I might have to use the law. And in the United States, well, if we have to sue, okay, we have to sue. But in many other parts of the world,
People don't do business with people they don't trust.
period. Okay?
So the title of the presentation today has been to not fall on our own assumptions. What we hope to do with this is to say, learn how to be an observer. Observe yourself and your own tendencies, observe others and what's really going on, but it's hard to do that without a context. And so we've given today 4 ideas that provide context so that when you start observing behavior of others, little lights start clicking that say, ah, a little more process-oriented than I am. Ah, a little more individualistic than I am. Ah, a little more direct than I am. And that gives you the context to make those observations and then gives you a chance to adjust your behavior based on that. It's a big deal, and I think that John just said that really well, so I won't go on to more of that and let you kind of wrap up with your side.
And ultimately, once you begin to make those observations and recognize what it is that you're seeing, once you have a vocabulary for understanding the differences that you're noticing, then you can begin to develop strategies for dealing more effectively with the people in your environment.
All right, we have time for Q&A. You'll hear some people say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And my strong advice to you is, when in Rome, understand what the Romans do, but do what makes most sense to you. Because the Romans might do stuff that's illegal. Okay. All right. Anybody have a question? You got to go to the mic? 2 mics. And by the way, if you think anything we said makes sense, we have some copies of books, not for sale, but you can see, and you can buy them some point in the future. Go ahead.
So I'll try to be quick. I actually train on these exact things. I have a company called American Culture Consultants, so I love this. I use Gert Hofstede, usually is 6 Dimensions of National Culture, which is what is funny is because right now I'm working with a different company of mine with one of the largest Chinese SOEs. Mind you, I speak Chinese. I love the culture. I've been living there and working there for 25 years. And yet I find myself in this predicament where the materials, the business plan that I've received, they're looking for a partnership in America with a very renowned American partner, is subpar. And I've had to find myself being much more straightforward than I know is comfortable in this situation. And so my question to you is there a sense that because they're coming and they're the ones looking for the partnership in this instance, that one culture actually kind of wins, if you say, or they get the greater leeway, because in order for the Chinese to get this partnership that they want, they have to do certain things, and there has to be a straightforward meaning in order for that to happen.
I think that's a really important question. So people sometimes say to me, well, does that mean I always have to do all the accommodating? I have to learn about their culture and then I have to do it their way. No, the answer is no. But would you win a basketball game holding a baseball bat? Will you ever win a basketball game holding a bat?
Well, if you hit the other players, yeah.
So cultures are like games. In order to win the game, you need to know the game that's being played. Now, there are some things that come out of baseball that could be very effective in basketball, strategy and other things, but you will only be able to apply them effectively if you understand the rules of basketball first. So is it the buyer or the seller? Is it the larger company or the smaller one? And so on, who has the leverage? In every case, that's going to be different. And the nature of leverage is not always what we think. Maybe a seller wants to sell in a new market, and or a buyer is desperately in need of something, and the seller has more leverage, although we tend to think of the buyer as having more leverage. So it depends on the individual circumstance.
What I do in a situation like that is I tell the client, listen, this is what they're looking for. This is what they need. And I know you might not think it's important, but if we want to cut the deal with them, this is what they're looking for, and we need to give them something that makes sense to them. By explaining it that way, that tends to eliminate
minimize, yeah.
you've done crappy work.
See, it's a positive because both sides are trying to make an adjustment. So you can take that a positive side as well.
And I like the recognition that I know I'm being American and I know that this is straightforward, but I must tell you this in order for us to get the business done.
Well, that's what they expect from you. I mean, that's why they hire you.
Well-
If you don't tell me that I'm screwing up, then why am I paying you any money? Do we have any
However-
other questions? Because we
Wait.
can.
I want to make one other
Ooh,
point.
yes, ma'am.
To the issue with indirectness, providing context is what indirect people expect. So if you say, here's what the Americans expect, you don't have to say, so your proposal is garbage. What you say is, this is what Americans expect,
Absolutely.
and they will come to that conclusion on their own. So that's the strategy.
Madame.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so maybe aside from seeking out culture consultant or some individual, what are other good sources of educating yourself on other cultures if you're evaluating new markets or trying to weigh the pros and cons of moving into different countries?
There are tons of books on any country you want to examine. However, I would caution you to be very cautious of country models because they tend to give you, in fact, some of them even give you a score. China's a 31 for this and Japan's a 76. That is very dangerous and misleading because China is diverse, Japan is diverse, the US is diverse.
As you saw in our little questionnaire here.
This room is diverse. So instead of saying, oh, people here are this way, what you want to do is begin to educate yourself on how to figure out those differences for yourself. You might start with a country approach, and then you want to begin to become an investigator on your own.
You want to learn the culture, you want to learn the history, most importantly, you want to learn the jokes. My wife does international business, and when she goes to a new country, the first thing she does in the hotel, she turns on the TV for the purpose of looking at the ads. Because she said how people deal with humor and ads tells her a lot about the value system of a country. And it's amazing. I thought it didn't make any sense.
And if you have a few minutes after 1 o'clock, I can show you a few more things online before you run away.
Okay. Next question. Last question.
So with so many differences between the cultures, and you only discussed 4 big ones, how did you arrive at those 4, and what other potential big ones are out there that we should be thinking about?
Those 4 are taken from a cultural framework that I use in my book. There are 8 cultural dimensions in that framework. Different scholars and consulting groups have proposed different frameworks. I find that those 8 dimensions cover most of what you'll find. No framework is going to cover every example that you encounter, but if you understand how the frameworks work, then you can begin to say, well, there's no name for this, but I'm going to call it X, and here's how it seems to work, and here's the opposite of it, which is what I do, and you can use any framework that way.
One big one that we didn't talk about is gender. And there are some countries where being female is or is not an advantage, and you got to figure out how to work with it. Our recommendation then is if you're in a country where the normal role of women is subservient and you're a female, then you stress the fact that you're an American. And I've been in a lot of countries where it's just, there's a double standard. Another example is ethnicity or what area you're from. And back in the old days when there was discrimination against African Americans, if somebody were to dress in African garb, they would be treated differently. Because clearly they're not African American, they're African, so that's okay. So you just have to understand how you translate who you are into an environment that might not like who you are if you're local.
And often you can use your status as a not very scary person because you have low status to your advantage. So it's not the case that if you are from a low status minority or gender that you can't be even more effective. It's a question of understanding how to flip that to your advantage.
Well, we would like to thank all of you for coming. This has been fast-paced, a lot of good questions, a lot of interesting things. I like the answers that some of you have. If you want to stay in touch with us, you can do it through Texas Enterprise. We really appreciate your being here. And unfortunately, we're going to end on time.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was fun.